There are voices that entertain, voices that impress, voices that soothe, and then there was Whitney Houston, a voice that didn't simply sing, but lifted souls, reshaped the music industry, and touched the deepest, most hidden corners of the human spirit. She wasn't just good, she was otherworldly, so naturally gifted that even legends bowed their heads in awe. And yet, behind that supernatural talent lived a woman fighting battles the world never truly understood. Her life is a reminder that voices like hers are born once in a century, but also that even the brightest star can dim under the weight of a world that demands too much, takes too much, and gives too little back. Before the scandals, before the gossip, before the fall that shocked millions, there was simply a young girl with a dream, a church-filled childhood, and a gift she did not yet know would change everything. Whitney Elizabeth Houston was born on August 9, 1963, in Newark, New Jersey, into a world of music so thick it practically pulls through the walls of her home. She wasn't just raised around singers, she was raised around greatness. Her mother, Cissy Houston, was a legendary gospel and soul singer in her own right, a woman whose voice commanded respect across the industry. Dionne Warwick was her cousin. Aretha Franklin was her godmother. To some, these were iconic names. To Whitney, they were simply family. Music wasn't just something she heard, it was something she breathed. It wrapped around her like a blanket, comforting and constant, shaping her before she even understood its power. Growing up in Newark wasn't easy. The city, vibrant yet troubled, was a place where dreams had to be fought for, protected, and nurtured. But inside the New Hope Baptist Church, Whitney found her sanctuary. The pews smelled of wood and worn-out hymn books. The stained glass windows caught the sunlight in a way that made the whole room glow. And every Sunday, voices rose like prayers reaching for heaven. And in that sacred space, an 11-year-old, Whitney stepped forward and opened her mouth to sing. The room fell silent. People would later say that it felt as if time stopped, as if the walls leaned in to listen. It wasn't just that she sang beautifully, children can sing beautifully. It was that she carried emotion far beyond her years. That day, the congregation didn't just hear a child, they heard the makings of a legend. Her mother, Cissy, recognized it immediately. She knew talent real, once-in-a-lifetime talent when she heard it. And Whitney wasn't just repeating notes, she was interpreting them, shaping them, infusing them with the soulful maturity that made grown adults weep. Cissy pushed her, trained her, and taught her the discipline that greatness demands. Whitney didn't always like it, but she absorbed it. That foundation would later become the bedrock of her impossible vocal control, her unparalleled pitch, and that soaring power that could fill stadiums effortlessly. By the time Whitney was a teenager, she was already singing backup vocals professionally. She stood behind Chaka Khan, Jermaine Jackson, and Lou Rawls, artists who had carved their own places in music history. Even then, people whispered about her, wondering who that girl with the angelic clarity was. She wasn't even out of high school, yet she had a voice that rivaled grown professionals. She also found herself modeling, gracing magazine covers at a time when African American models were rarely seen in mainstream beauty campaigns. But while the modeling world opened doors, it never held her heart. Singing was her truth, her calling, the thing that set her soul on fire. Then came the night that changed everything. Clive Davis, a man known for molding stars like clay in his hands, heard Whitney perform in a small club. The room wasn't fancy, the stage wasn't grand, but when Whitney sang, the world inside those walls shifted. Clive sat still, entranced. He later said he felt chills, the kind that told him he wasn't just listening to talent, he was witnessing destiny. People applauded, but Clive didn't clap immediately. He stared, stunned, processing what he had just heard. And when she finished, he knew. He knew she was the one, not just a star, a phenomenon. Signing Whitney Houston was like discovering a diamond untouched by the world. But diamonds, as we know, are formed under pressure, something Whitney would one day experience to an unbearable degree. Clive guided her carefully. He shaped her debut album with precision, bringing together the best producers, the best songwriters, the best musicians, determined to introduce this voice to the world with the reverence it deserved. And when her first album, simply titled Whitney Houston, was released in 1985, the world didn't just listen, they erupted. The industry felt it instantly. Radio couldn't get enough of her. Her songs weren't just hits, they became anthems of love, heartbreak, hope, and longing. Saving All My Love for You, How Will I Know, Greatest Love of All. Each track carved itself into the hearts of millions. And Whitney, young, shy, graceful Whitney, became a superstar overnight. But she didn't behave like one. She spoke softly, moved gently, laughed shyly. In a world that rewarded arrogance, she remained humble. In an industry filled with theatrics, she let her voice do the talking. And oh, what talking it did! Her voice wasn't just powerful, it was pristine, crystal clear, a sound that seemed too perfect to belong to a human being. Listeners described it as a bright beam of light piercing through the darkness. Critics called her the voice, and for once, a nickname was an understatement. She didn't just hit notes, she soared, danced, and glided on them with effortless elegance. Her vocal runs were liquid gold, her breath control was flawless, and her emotional delivery was enough to bring strangers to tears. But fame is a tricky gift. It lifts you, celebrates you, crowns you, and then watches to see if you can survive the wait. Whitney's rise was meteoric, faster, brighter, and more overwhelming than anyone around her could fully understand. She was everywhere: television screens, magazine covers, stages around the world. Fans adored her, critics praised her. Her success was so spectacular that it almost didn't seem real. And yet, behind the glamour, something else was happening, something quiet, something subtle, something that would one day swallow her whole. Whitney didn't grow up weak, but she grew up gentle, sensitive, soft-hearted, and the world wasn't gentle back. When she crossed over from gospel and R&B into the mainstream pop world, she faced criticism from multiple directions. Some accused her of abandoning her blackness. Others felt she was too polished, too perfect, too angelic. In an era where artists were often boxed into expectations, Whitney was attacked for refusing to fit neatly into any. It hurt her deeply. For a woman who loved people fiercely and felt emotions intensely, the criticism cut sharper than most realized. Still, she kept going. She performed for presidents, filled arenas, and shattered records. She won Grammy after Grammy, becoming a global icon before she even turned 25. But fame, with all its applause and spotlight, also brings isolation. Whitney's circle grew smaller, expectations grew heavier, and somewhere along the journey, shadows began to appear. Meeting Bobby Brown was the turning point the world still discusses today. It's impossible to tell Whitney's story without acknowledging that moment, without exploring the complexity, the passion, and the chaos that followed. When Whitney met Bobby, she was already America's sweetheart, polished, elegant, untouchable. Bobby was the opposite: raw, wild, unpredictable, magnetic in his own dangerous way. To outsiders, it made no sense. But to Whitney, it made perfect sense. She saw someone who understood pain, someone who lived passionately, someone who loved her without asking her to be perfect. Their connection was instant, powerful, and intense. Two extremes colliding, two souls drawn to each other like fire to oxygen. And just like fire, the relationship could warm or destroy, sometimes in the same breath. People around her worried, they whispered, they warned. But Whitney was stubborn. She believed in love with her whole heart, believed she could hold everything together. But what she didn't realize was that she was already holding too much. As her career climbed higher, her personal life became more turbulent. The pressure of fame was relentless. The scrutiny was unforgiving. And those whispers of drug use whispers she fiercely denied. For years began to grow louder. But Whitney wasn't weak. She wasn't reckless. She was overwhelmed. The weight of perfection, the demands of fame, and the loneliness inside her own success pushed her into cracks where escape seemed easier than confrontation. Still, she delivered masterpiece after masterpiece. In 1992, she starred in The Bodyguard alongside Kevin Costner, and with it came that song I Will Always Love You, a song that didn't just break records, it defined an era, a generation, a lifetime. The first note, that pure, a cappella whisper that crescendos into a tidal wave of power. People still talk about where they were when they first heard it. Whitney didn't merely sing it, she lived it. Every breath, every swell, every aching note carried a universe of emotion. The world had never heard anything like it, and it likely never will again. But even as she stood higher than any artist of her time, the pressure deepened. She tried to balance love, career, motherhood, family expectations, and a world that did not allow her to be human. People wanted more, another hit, another tour, other perfect performance. And Whitney, with her generous spirit and sense of responsibility, kept giving. Even when she was exhausted, even when she was hurting, even when her heart was fraying at the edges. But a person can only carry so much. And Whitney's cracks, invisible to the outside world for so long, began to show. Her voice, once flawless, started to strain. The press, once adoring, turned ruthless. Tabloids hunted her, mocked her, magnified her pain. Every stumble became a headline. Every flaw became entertainment. And Whitney, woman who gave the world everything, found the world giving her very little grace in return. Behind closed doors, the battles worsened. Not because she didn't try to fight them, she did, many times. But the world saw only the fault, never the effort, never the humanity. And as her marriage grew more chaotic, her career more demanding, and her spirit more fragile, Whitney scrambled to hold on to the life she had built, the love she cherished, and the identity she felt slipping from her grasp. And this is where the world began to break the very voice it once worshipped. This is where the pressures, judgments, betrayals, addictions, and burdens started to intertwine into a storm too powerful for one woman to face alone. But this is only the beginning, only the first act of a life too complex, too beautiful, and too tragic to fit into simple explanations. Whitney Houston was a woman, divided between who the world wanted her to be and who she truly was. And as the years moved forward, that divide grew wider, deeper, and harder to cross. The pressure on Whitney's shoulders had become a kind of invisible cage, one that glimmered on the outside with diamonds, awards, sold-out arenas, and magazine covers, but on the inside, felt increasingly claustrophobic. Fame had taken her voice and amplified it for the world, but it had also taken her privacy, her peace, and slowly, inch by inch, her sense of self. As she stepped into the 1990s, the height of her success, no one knew that the same era would also mark the beginning of her slow, heartbreaking unraveling. After The Bodyguard exploded into global success in 1992, Whitney achieved a level of superstardom that most artists can only dream of. She wasn't just a singer or a movie star, she was a phenomenon. Her soundtrack became the best-selling soundtrack of all time. Her version of I Will Always Love You became the song of the decade. Her fame reached continents she had never stepped foot on. And yet, even in the golden glow of all this success, Whitney felt something shifting inside her. The applause was still loud, but it no longer filled the quiet spaces in her heart. She began to feel more watched than loved, more dissected than understood. Every smile had to be perfect, every performance flawless, every interview polished, and little by little, the cost of perfection began to drain her. Her relationship with Bobby Brown, already intense, became more complicated. Their love was fiery, passionate, magnetic, intoxicating. But passion, when mixed with the pressures of fame and personal struggles, can easily turn destructive. Whitney and Bobby lived in a world where emotions were amplified. Love felt deeper, fights felt louder, vulnerabilities felt sharper. They were two imperfect humans trying desperately to hold onto something that was slipping away piece by piece. Whitney wanted stability, but Bobby often wanted chaos. Whitney wanted peace, but Bobby was accustomed to storms. And yet, she clung to him with a loyalty that sometimes hurt her more than it helped. The media, always hungry for drama, began to shift its tone. No longer was Whitney the pure, angelic sweetheart of America. They started questioning her choices, her marriage, her friendships, her behavior. It was as if the world decided she wasn't allowed to be human. Anytime her voice cracked, they said she was losing it. Anytime she looked tired, they said she was on the brink. Anytime she made a mistake, They turned it into a spectacle, and for someone as sensitive as Whitney, these attacks burrowed deep into her soul. Behind closed doors, Whitney struggled with the pressures that come with being an icon. The expectations were suffocating. Her tours demanded perfection day after day, city after city, with no space for exhaustion or emotion. The obligations, the interviews, appearances, photo shoots, rehearsals never seemed to end. And in the midst of this overwhelming schedule, she tried to hold on to her identity as a mother. When Bobby Christina was born in 1993, Whitney felt a kind of love she had never known before. Holding her tiny daughter in her arms felt like touching something pure, something divine, something that reminded her why life was still worth fighting for. She often said that motherhood saved her in moments when she felt she was losing herself to the world's demands. But motherhood came with new pressures, a desire to protect her daughter from the same scrutiny she faced, a determination to give Bobby Christina a normal childhood in a life that was anything but normal. Whitney worried constantly. She wanted to be a present mother, but her fame pulled her away. She wanted to be strong, but she was exhausted. She wanted to raise her daughter with love and stability, but the storms around her never seemed to calm. As the mid-1990s arrived, Whitney's struggles began to show in subtle ways. Her voice, once effortlessly pristine, occasionally sounded strained. Her energy seemed inconsistent. She canceled shows. She arrived late to rehearsals. Fans speculated. The press intensified. Rumors swirled about substance use. Whitney denied fiercely, but couldn't outrun. The public didn't understand that Whitney wasn't spiraling out of recklessness. She was drowning under the weight of her own legend. The world demanded the extraordinary from her every single day, and she was terrified of disappointing the people who loved her. But the truth was that she was only human, and humans break, especially when asked to carry more than any soul should bear. Whitney truly tried to hold everything together. She sought help. She leaned on her family. She leaned on her faith. But sometimes support from outside isn't enough when the real battle is happening inside one's own heart. She felt torn between her obligations and her exhaustion, between her love for her family and the demands of her fame, between her desire to be strong and the cracks that kept forming in her spirit. In the late 90s, she released My Love Is Your Love, an album that reminded the world of her brilliance. Songs like It's Not Right, But It's Okay showed a fiercer, more independent Whitney, while the title track captured a tender, soulful warmth that felt like a fragile whisper from her heart. The album was a success, but even with all the applause, Whitney was still battling demons behind the scenes. The machine of fame no longer felt like something she controlled, it felt like something that controlled her. By the early 2000s, Whitney's struggles became harder to hide. There were interviews where she looked tired, where her once bright eyes seemed clouded with sadness. There were performances where her voice cracked in ways that made fans worry. There were public moments that hinted at a deeper pain. And the media, instead of offering compassion, chose cruelty. They mocked, they judged, they sensationalized. They turned her pain into entertainment, forgetting that behind the headlines was a living, breathing woman who had given the world decades of beauty, music, and joy. Whitney's marriage to Bobby was also deteriorating. They still loved each other, perhaps too much, but their love had become tangled in unhealthy patterns. Arguments grew more frequent. Emotional wounds deepened. Their home, once a place of passion, became a battlefield of misunderstandings, resentment, and unresolved hurt. Whitney tried to hold on, hoping that love could heal everything. But love alone wasn't enough to fix the fractures forming beneath the surface. Her beloved daughter, Bobby Christina, watched all of this happening around her. Whitney wanted to shield her, but the chaos seeped through the cracks. And nothing breaks a mother more than realizing her child is hurting because she herself is hurting. Whitney felt guilt, shame, fear, and heartbreak all at once. She wasn't a bad mother, not by any means, but she was a mother struggling to survive a storm far too powerful to face alone. Still, Whitney tried to return to herself, tried to reclaim her voice literally and emotionally. She attempted comebacks, each one met with both hope and harsh judgment. People wanted the old Whitney back, the perfect one, the flawless one, the superhuman one. But they didn't understand that the old Whitney no longer existed. She had been chipped away by pressure, exhaustion, trauma, and pain. She was still brilliant, still radiant, still Whitney, but she was wounded. The world watched her struggle, but few asked why. Few asked what pain she carried, what loneliness she lived with, what burdens weighed on her heart. Even fewer asked what society, the industry, the media had done to contribute to her breaking. And that is the tragedy at the center of Whitney Houston's story. The world loved her voice, but rarely cared for the person behind it. The early 2000s brought more challenges. Whitney withdrew from public life, often disappearing from the spotlight for long stretches. Rumors intensified, speculation grew, and the media, rather than stepping back, pushed harder. Paparazzi chased her. Tabloids twisted stories. Interviewers probed with questions designed to wound. Whitney faced a world that wanted her to rise while simultaneously expecting her to fall. Inside her home, inside her heart, Whitney was trying to figure out who she was without the expectations, without the applause, without the pressure to be perfect. She knew she needed help. She knew she needed healing, and she tried more times than the world ever acknowledged. She went to therapy. She took breaks. She sought guidance. She leaned on faith. But healing is rarely linear, and Whitney's path was filled with steps forward and steps backward, moments of strength and moments of weakness. Her voice, the gift that had defined her entire existence, began to show the effects of stress, exhaustion, and years of strain. It was still powerful, still beautiful, but it no longer soared with the same effortless grace that had once stunned the world. For Whitney, this was devastating. Her voice wasn't just her talent, it was her identity, her solace, her connection to the divine. To feel it slipping away was like losing a part of herself. And yet, even in her darkest moments, Whitney remained deeply spiritual. She prayed, she cried out to God, she sought peace in music, in the quiet moments with her daughter, in the memories of simpler times. She held on to the hope that she could still rise, that she could still heal, that she could still reclaim the life that had once brought her joy. Her family, especially her mother Sissy, tried to intervene multiple times. They loved her fiercely, but Whitney was an adult, a woman with her own will, her own strength, her own stubbornness. She didn't want to be pitied. She didn't want to feel controlled. She wanted understanding, not judgment. She wanted support, not pressure. But often, the help she received felt like scrutiny, and the scrutiny felt like another burden. By the mid-2000s, Whitney's public image had become a battlefield of opinions. Some fans remained loyal, praying for her return. Others judged harshly, forgetting the years she had carried the world on her voice. And behind all the noise, Whitney was simply trying to survive, trying to navigate fame, love, addiction, motherhood, expectations, and her own fragile heart. And this is where the story reaches a crucial turning point, the moment when Whitney, tired of the storms, tired of the pain, tired of being broken, begins to fight her way back toward the light. A comeback the world didn't expect. A reclamation of strength no one saw coming. A final chapter of resilience, courage, and heartbreaking beauty. Whitney Houston's life, by the time she entered the late 2000s, felt like a long corridor filled with echoes of applause, echoes of criticism, echoes of mistakes she could not undo, echoes of love she wanted to protect, and above all, echoes of the woman she used to be. She was tired of fighting rumors, tired of battling expectations, tired of being judged for every step, every breath, every crack in her voice. But beneath the exhaustion, there was still a spark, a quiet, glowing ember of hope that refused to die. Whitney had been down before, had felt lost before, but she had always risen. And deep within her heart, she believed that she could rise again. When she decided to leave Bobby Brown in the mid-2000s, it was not a decision made lightly. Love had held them together for years, but hurt had weighed them down even more. Their marriage had become a battlefield where both of them were wounded. And Whitney finally realized that staying would destroy not just her, but her daughter as well. Filing for divorce was an act of courage, one of the bravest decisions of her life. It was her way of saying, I choose life. I choose healing. I choose peace. In those moments, Whitney wasn't the superstar, the icon, the voice. She was simply a woman reclaiming her freedom. After the separation, Whitney retreated from the spotlight, but this time with purpose. She wanted to rebuild herself not for the world, but for her daughter, for her mother, and for the little girl she once was. She leaned deeply into her faith, attending church more frequently, praying with the kind of desperation that comes from wanting to be reborn. Her mother, Whitney Houston, remained her anchor, stern, loving, protective. The bond between them, tested by years of fame and family expectations, slowly began to heal. Whitney admitted her mistakes. Sissy forgave her, and together, they tried to chart a path back toward stability. Bobby Christine, now a teenager, became Whitney's greatest motivation. Whitney wanted her daughter to see her strength, not her weaknesses. She wanted her to remember her as a fighter, not a fallen star. She poured her heart into rebuilding their relationship, taking her on trips, having long conversations late at night, hugging her with a tenderness that felt both protective and apologetic. Whitney often said that Bobby Christina was her heart, living outside her body, and in those years, she fought fiercely to protect that heart from the chaos of the past. The media waited, watching from the shadows, ready to pounce on any sign of weakness. But Whitney didn't crumble. She worked hard, excruciatingly hard, to regain control of her life. She went through rehabilitation programs. She surrounded herself with people she trusted. She began vocal training again, gently coaxing her voice back into shape. It was not the effortless process it once had been. Her voice now carried scars, notes that once flew like birds, now struggled to take flight. But Whitney refused to give up. She knew that even if her voice wasn't what it used to be, her spirit was still powerful, her message still meaningful. In 2009, after years of uncertainty, Whitney made her comeback. The world watched as she appeared on Good Morning America, standing strong, radiant, and proud. Her voice cracked during the performance. She struggled to hit some high notes. But for millions watching, that didn't matter. They saw a woman who had been shattered, who had faced storms that would have crushed anyone else. And yet there she stood, still singing, still fighting, still shining. The applause was thunderous. Fans cried. The world was reminded not of her flaws, but of her resilience. She released her album Look to You, a deeply emotional collection of songs that reflected her journey through heartbreak, healing, and faith. The lyrics felt like diary entries, confessions, prayers whispered into the darkness. The album debuted at #1, proving that the world still loved her not just for her voice, but for her courage. In interviews, she looked healthy, hopeful, grounded. She laughed. She smiled. She spoke openly about her struggles, refusing to hide behind illusions. For the first time in years, Whitney felt like she was in control. Yet, healing is never a straight path. Some days Whitney felt strong, and other days she felt fragile. Some days she believed she could reclaim everything she lost, and other days she simply wanted rest. Her voice continued to fluctuate. Some performances were strong, others shaky. Critics, always eager to dissect, began questioning whether her comeback would last. But Whitney wasn't focused on proving anything to the critics. Her focus was on living, and finding peace. Her final film role, in the 2012 remake of Sparkle, brought her genuine joy. Whitney had wanted to star in the original film decades earlier, but life had taken her in a different direction. Returning to the project now felt symbolic, like closing a loop, completing a circle. On set, she was warm, encouraging, and maternal, especially toward young co-star Jordan Sparks. Whitney became a mentor, offering advice, cracking jokes, and sharing stories about her own early days in the industry. Cast members later recalled that she seemed calm during filming, as though she had found a moment of peace that had eluded her for so long. But there were still signs of struggle, moments when Whitney appeared tired, distracted, or weighed down by invisible burdens. Those close to her noticed the subtle shifts. They loved her, worried for her, prayed for her. Whitney, always proud, always wanting to protect the people she loved from worry, insisted she was fine. She had learned to mask her pain with a smile, to hide her storms behind a laugh. The days leading up to February 11, 2012, were strangely quiet, almost eerily so. Whitney was in Los Angeles for Clive Davis's annual pre-Grammy party, an event she once commanded like a queen. Those around her said she was upbeat at times, somber at others. She went to rehearsals, greeted friends, struggled with fatigue, laughed with her team, and hugged her daughter tightly. She seemed caught between two worlds. The woman she once was and the woman she was trying desperately to be. And somewhere in that in-between, something slipped. When news broke on February 11th that Whitney Houston had passed away, the world felt a shockwave that rippled through every corner of the earth. People gasped, fans cried, celebrities offered tributes, radio stations played her songs nonstop. It felt impossible and unthinkable that the voice that had carried nations through heartache and joy, the voice that had broken records, the voice that had become the soundtrack of generations, had gone silent. Whitney was found alone in her hotel bathroom, and with her death came 1,000 unanswered questions, 1,000 regrets, 1,000 what-ifs. But above all, there was grief, a deep, collective grief felt by millions who had never met her, yet felt as though they had lost a piece of their own history. Bobby Christina was shattered. The bond between mother and daughter had been profound, almost mystical, and losing Whitney left her adrift in a way words can barely describe. She clung to memories, warm nights, whispered conversations, songs they sang together, laughter shared behind closed doors. But grief can be merciless, especially for a young woman who had spent her entire life in the shadow of her mother's brilliance and struggles. In the years that followed, Bobby Christina battled her own pain, her own heartbreak, her own demons. And in 2015, in a tragic reflection of her mother's fate, she too left this world far too soon. The heartbreak of losing them both, mother and daughter, bound by love, bound by tragedy, still lingers in the hearts of fans around the world. In the aftermath of Whitney's passing, the world began to reflect not on the scandals or the mistakes, but on the humanity that had always been overshadowed by her fame. People played her songs and remembered where they were when they first heard her voice. They remembered the goosebumps, the tears, the awe. They remembered weddings, breakups, funerals, celebrations, all moments where Whitney's voice had been a companion, a guide, a comfort. The world realized, perhaps too late, that Whitney Houston had been more than an icon. She had been a gift, fragile, powerful, irreplaceable. Her legacy today is not defined by her struggles. It is defined by her brilliance. Her voice remains the benchmark by which every singer is measured. Her songs continue to resonate with new generations. Young artists still name her as their greatest inspiration, and fans, millions of them, still speak her name with love, respect, and sorrow. Whitney's story is not simply a story of talent. It is a story of vulnerability, pressure, love, heartbreak, resilience, and ultimately, the cost of being extraordinary in a world that often demands far too much from its stars. Whitney Houston's life teaches us that even the brightest lights can dim under relentless pressure, that even the most gifted souls need gentleness and understanding. She reminds us that behind every icon is a human being, someone who laughs, cries, struggles, and hopes, someone who needs love, compassion, and forgiveness. Whitney gave everything she had to the world, her voice, her heart, her spirit, and in return, the world loved her deeply, but also broke her in ways she never deserved. And yet, even in her absence, Whitney Houston continues to shine. The recordings she left behind still pierce the heart. Her performances still inspire awe. Her smile, radiant, warm, genuine, still lights up screens decades later. She lives on, not just in memory, but in the very fabric of music history. Her influence is woven into every singer who attempts a high note, every performance that strives for emotional depth, every moment when music lifts the soul. Whitney's story will always be bittersweet, a breathtaking rise, a painful fall, and a legacy that remains eternal. She was a woman of contrasts, strong yet vulnerable, joyful yet burdened, disciplined yet overwhelmed. She was a mother, a daughter, a friend, a lover, a survivor, and ultimately, a legend whose brilliance came at a cost the world can never repay. But perhaps the greatest truth of Whitney Houston's life is this: even after everything she endured, even after the struggles, the heartbreak, and the pain, she never lost her capacity to love. She loved deeply, fiercely, passionately. She loved music with her entire being. She loved her daughter with a devotion that transcended every challenge. She loved her family, her fans, her faith. And that love, more than anything else, is what continues to echo long after her final note. So when we remember Whitney, let's remember not the tragedy, but the triumph. Not the fall, but the rise. Not the scars, but the soul. Let us remember the girl who sang in church with a voice that made angels pause. The young woman who took the world by storm with grace and humility. The superstar who broke records and barriers. The mother who fought for her daughter. The woman who searched for peace in a world that demanded perfection. The human being who did her best, even when the world expected the impossible. Whitney Houston may be gone, but her voice, her gift, remains immortal. It floats through time, untouched by age, and touched by tragedy. It comforts, it uplifts, it inspires, and it reminds us that some souls are born to shine so brightly that even after the body is gone, the light remains. In the end, Whitney Houston was not just the voice. She was the heart. She was the story. She was the miracle the world could not protect. And though the world broke her, her voice will never, ever be silenced.